video was created several years ago using a previous version of Visual Studio. The differences to the current version of Visual Studio are primarily cosmetic, most notably the older window styles, and everything discussed applies to today's working environment. As time permits, I will redevelop this video so it's current with the most recent version of Visual Studio.
Visual Studio is what we call an IDE, or Integrated Development Environment. It allows us to create applications, compile them, test them, debug them, and modify them all in one spot. So thus it is an integrated development environment. Within the IDE, we have some panels and windows that we can use in setting up our environment, how we like to work. When you first open Visual Studio and create a project, you're going to have the toolbox over here on the left. This is where our controls are located that we use to build our interface. The common controls are the primary ones we'll use in this class, at least initially, and we won't even use all of these, but we'll use quite a few of them. And then there's also controls that are grouped together based on what they do. For example, there are containers that include things like group boxes and panels that we use in tab controls. There are menus and toolbars for creating menu items and menu strips and tool strips. There's a data collection for working with databases and binding controls to a data source. There are dialog boxes that we can use for opening a file or saving a file, or bringing up a font dialog or print dialog. Those are the types of tools that we will use this semester. The toolbox, as with all the other panels, can be hidden. There is a little push pin up here on the top of the toolbox, and if I click on that so that that push pin is sideways, it goes into what we call auto hide mode. And I can simply come back over and select the toolbox and click on a control and use it. But if I want to keep that open, I can click this little push pin that locks it into place. I can also change the width of it once it's docked or locked into place. So I can modify how my environment looks and how much space I have for each of the areas. As we said in the previous videos, this is our working window. So we have a form here in this application. We can have multiple forms, and the types of things we'll do initially will work with just one form. Over on the right-hand side, we have typically a panel that is the Solution Explorer. This is a way of managing the source code files of our project. We won't do a whole lot with it, but when you first open a project, if it's one you've already saved and you're reopening it, you won't see the window pop up. You'll have to come over here and double-click on the form to have it pop up. So that's probably the one way you'll use this window. Below that is our Properties window. We'll use the Properties window a lot in modifying controls in how they look and how they behave. We can also modify the width of this window, and I can change how these windows are stacked. I can take that panel and pull it off so it's undocked and floating on top of my window, or I can take a floating panel and dock it back in place. I also, in this integrated development environment, have a window that's available to me for tracking my errors and warnings of my code. And as we've seen earlier with our working area here with the design form, I can access the code in that window as well and modify the code here. So lots of things I can do in this Windows environment. There is a view menu where I can turn things on or off, so there's other things I can add in. But this is the way we'll primarily work with Visual Studio in this class. One of the changes you might want to make in working with your code, I'm going to go back to my code window here by double-clicking on a control, is if I had an error somewhere. Let's change this code so it says integer. You notice I get an error down here at the bottom. And it's giving me a little red squiggly line underneath the word integer, and that's saying the compiler doesn't understand that. As I look at the error description down here, I can see the line that it's on. It's on line 22, and it's starting in column 13. But I can't see the line numbers here. One of the things I like to do is modify my environment a bit by going to the Tools menu, going down to Options, and you'll find an area that says Text Editor. I'm going to choose the All Languages, and there's a checkbox over here on the right-hand side that says Display Line Numbers. I'm going to choose that, click OK, and now I can see the line numbers and I can very easily find line 22 and discover where my error is, and then I can change that. Notice my error now goes away. To compile a project within Visual Studio, once you've created your interface and written the code, there's a little icon up here for Start Debugging, or you can go to the Debug menu and choose Start Debugging, or press the F5 function key. That will compile your code, and if you have no errors, it will create the executable, run the application within the IDE, and you can test it and make sure it works. At this point, the IDE has grayed out, my application is running, and if I try to make changes to my code, it won't let me make changes because my application is still running. And what I need to do is go back to my application window, my testing window, and close that application. So I can do it by clicking the close box, or I can come down to the status bar, find the icon for the running application, and choose Close Window. That will bring me back into the IDE environment where I can then make modifications. If you're going to start a new project, you can simply go to the File menu, choose New Project, decide which language you're going to work in, either Visual Basic or C#, and then decide what type of project you're going to create. We're going to create Windows Forms applications really exclusively in this class, and then I can give it a name. So I might call this my first project. Click OK. And I now have a blank form or blank window for my project, and I can begin building my application by adding controls to it and then going in and coding those controls. When you go to save your project, you want to go to File and choose Save All. That should always be your choice rather than Save Form. That can get you into problems if you try to save that Form 1 someplace else. We want to keep all of our project files together. So always choose Save All. When you go to open a project that you've already been working on, go to File, Open Project. I'm going to discard these changes here, and I'm going to open an existing project by finding the solution file in that project, the .sln. Double click on that. That will open that project. Now, a lot of times what will happen is that project will open and you won't have anything here in the center as far as your project. If you simply double click on Form 1, it will open the design form. Under the File menu, you can also very quickly access recent projects that you have worked on.